You're not a guest in this family, Lily. You're the maid. Now get in the kitchen. That's what my mother told me the night before Christmas Eve. After 15 years of being invisible in my own home, those words finally broke something inside me. Before I take you into that moment, let me pause. If you enjoy stories where dignity finally wins over cruelty, go ahead and hit subscribe. And I'd love for you to comment below where you're watching from and what time it is right now. I read every single one. It feels like sharing these family secrets across the world together. Now back to me. My name is Lily Sullivan. I'm 32, and for as long as I can remember, I was treated like the family servant. Every Thanksgiving, every Christmas, every birthday, I was the one cooking in the background while my younger sister Sarah soaked up the spotlight in designer dresses our parents bought her. She was the golden child. I was the help. But last December, the script flipped. My mother called, voice sharp as ever, "Cancel your silly plans. Tomorrow you'll cook dinner for 25 of Sarah's VIP guests. 7 mains, 10 sides. Don't embarrass us." What she didn't know was that I already had a flight booked and a $2 million contract waiting for me in Florida. For 5 years, I'd quietly built a catering empire, 50 employees strong. I used a different company name, never linked to Sullivan. That's why no one in my family ever connected the dots. To them, I was still between jobs. To the rest of the industry, I was a rising CEO. That night, while folding my blazer into my suitcase, I realized their last-minute emergencies were not my responsibilities. My silence had been mistaken for weakness, but soon, the truth would speak louder than anything I could ever say. Because the very woman my mother demanded I cook for was already waiting to call me boss. I stared at the suitcase on my bed, the zipper half closed when my phone lit up again. Mom. My chest tightened, but instead of the old fear, I felt something different. Calm. I picked up. "Lily, you'll be here by noon tomorrow. 25 guests, 7 mains, 10 sides. Don't make me repeat myself." I let her words hang in the air, then answered carefully, "Mom, I can't do it." Silence. Then her voice cracked like a whip. "What do you mean you can't?" "Sarah's entire career depends on this dinner. Do you know how expensive catering is on Christmas Eve? We need you for years." That phrase, "we need you," was enough to chain me back into the kitchen. But this time I looked at the leather folder on my nightstand. Inside was the Stellar Events contract. $2 million, 3 Florida resorts, 50 employees depending on me. "I have a business trip," I said. "I'm flying to Florida tonight." Her laugh was sharp, cruel. "Business? Stop pretending. You don't have a real job. You live in that tiny apartment. You cook sometimes, but that's not a career." I felt the words land like stones, but they didn't break me. Instead, I heard my own voice. Steady, firmer than it had ever been. "I'm a CEO, Mom. I own a company. I employ 50 people. Enough with the fantasies," she snapped. "Family comes first. If you walk out that door, don't bother coming back." Here was the ultimatum, the same one she had thrown at me since I was 17, but this time, something inside me clicked. "Then I guess this is goodbye." That quote, that moment, was the pivot my life had been waiting for. My hand trembled, but not from fear. It was freedom, finally pressing send. I hung up before she could answer. For a long minute I just stood there, listening to the quiet hum of my city apartment. No shouting, no orders, just silence, and it felt like oxygen filling my lungs for the first time. The next morning, December 24th, sunlight poured across my kitchen counter. My phone buzzed nonstop with frantic texts from Sarah. "Mom's losing it. Get over here. If you ruin this, you're dead to us." I didn't reply. Instead, I picked up a notepad where I had written 3 emergency catering hotlines, professional teams who could handle last-minute chaos. I snapped a photo and sent it to our family group chat with one line. "Here are your options. I won't be there." It wasn't spite, it was clarity. Their lack of planning was not my emergency. I turned back to my suitcase, slipped the contract folder into my carry-on, and closed the zipper. By evening, the Uber pulled up in front of my building. As the driver loaded my bags, I glanced one last time at my phone. 17 missed calls from Mom, 12 from Sarah, even 3 from Dad, the man who usually stayed silent. I powered the phone off and slid it into my bag. For once, their panic wasn't mine to absorb. The city lights blurred past as we crossed the bridge toward JFK. I watched them fade, mile by mile, until Connecticut was just another cluster of lights in the distance. I thought of my mother's words, "If you walk out that door, don't bother coming back." And for the first time, I smiled, because the truth was, I wasn't walking away from family. I was walking toward myself. Tomorrow morning, I'd be sitting across from the woman my mother desperately wanted to impress, only she wouldn't see me in an apron. She'd see me for what I really was. Christmas Eve, 6 p.m. While my plane soared south toward Florida, my family home in Connecticut was descending into chaos. I know this because when I finally powered my phone back on, Sarah's texts told the entire story like a play-by-play. "Where are you?" she demanded at 6:05. "The kitchen is empty. Guests arrive in less than an hour. At 6:30, Mom is calling every restaurant in town. Everything is closed. It's Christmas Eve." By 7 p.m., the first guests were walking through the door. 25 executives, bankers, and Sarah's prized PR connections. And most importantly, Victoria Hale, the CEO of Pinnacle Hospitality. The very woman my mother hoped would advance Sarah's career. The same woman I was scheduled to meet in Florida the next morning. Sarah's next message nearly made me laugh out loud. "We're ordering pizza. Do you understand what you've done?" I pictured the scene as if I were standing in the corner, invisible as always. My mother, who had bragged for weeks about her lavish Christmas dinner, now forced to serve Papa John's and Domino's on her treasured Waterford crystal. At 7:45, another text came. "Mom just told everyone you're unreliable. She said you've always been the family disappointment that once stung, but not for long. Because just beneath the humiliation was a truth they couldn't control. The Forbes article about my company was scheduled to go live in less than 48 hours. The world would soon know who I really was, whether my family admitted it or not." I landed in Fort Lauderdale at 10:30 p.m., the humid air washing over me like freedom. In the back of the taxi, I opened Sarah's last desperate text of the night. "Victoria looks disgusted. Guests are leaving. Mom says you're dead to her." I put my phone down and whispered to myself, "Dead daughters don't sign million-dollar contracts." That quote became a strange kind of shield. They could bury me in shame, but it wouldn't erase the truth waiting in my folder. The next morning, December 25th, I woke in a resort suite overlooking the Atlantic. On the table was a bottle of champagne with a handwritten note, "Looking forward to our partnership. Victoria Hale." I thought about the surreal coincidence. Last night, my mother treated her future daughter-in-law's maid like a servant. Tonight, that same woman would sit across from me as her equal. The irony wasn't lost on me, but I didn't linger there, because this story wasn't about irony, it was about boundaries. By noon, my phone was vibrating with missed calls again. Dad, who almost never reached out, finally left a message. His voice was low, worn. "Your mother is having a breakdown. Please reconsider. You don't know what this is doing to her, but I did know. For years I had carried her image on my back. Perfect hostess, perfect family, and I had been the invisible labor making that illusion possible. Now stripped of me, the image was collapsing in front of the very crowd she wanted to impress. That evening, while I dressed in my best suit for dinner with Pinnacle's executives, I replayed Sarah's frantic messages in my head. They had expected me to show up, apron tied, face flushed, carrying trays into their glittering dining room. Instead, I had chosen myself, and that single choice had flipped the script. The step that sealed it came at 7:15 p.m. when Sarah texted again. "Mom told everyone you're mentally unstable. She said you have no career." I looked at the contract on my desk and thought, if only she knew. When I walked into the resort's private dining room at 7 p.m. sharp, Victoria Hale was already there. She looked tired but amused, shaking her head as she greeted me. "You won't believe the party I attended last night," she said, settling into her chair. "Supposed to be a glamorous dinner. The hostess bragged for weeks, but when we arrived she served pizza on crystal plates, and the whole night she wouldn't stop bad-mouthing her older daughter, called her unreliable, said she was a failure." I kept my face calm, my voice steady. "That must have been uncomfortable." Victoria laughed, almost in disbelief. "Uncomfortable? It was the most unprofessional event I've ever attended. Imagine destroying your reputation in front of the very people you're trying to impress." I nodded, hiding the storm inside me. If only she knew the daughter they mocked was the woman sitting across from her, about to sign the contract of a lifetime. The morning of December 26th arrived with a sky so clear it felt like a stage set for what was about to happen. I walked into Pinnacle's boardroom, portfolio under my arm, heart steady. For once I wasn't invisible. I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The presentation flowed smoothly. My team had prepared every detail: logistics, menus, projections. Victoria Hale and her executives nodded, took notes, asked sharp questions, and then, just as we reached the final slide, her assistant rushed in with an IPAD. "Miss Hale, you need to see this." Victoria's expression shifted from calm curiosity to shock. She turned the screen toward me. There, projected larger than life, was a photo from my parents' dining room, my mother flushed red, pizza boxes scattered across her polished mahogany table, guests staring in disbelief. She looked back at me. "This was last night." "The hostess, Margaret Sullivan. Any relation?" I took a breath, knowing this was the step I couldn't walk back from. "Yes, she's my mother." The room went silent. You could hear the weight of it pressing down. Victoria leaned forward, her voice measured. "The woman who called you unreliable, unemployable, is your mother?" "Yes," I said, keeping my tone even. "She never asked what I do for a living." She assumed I was a failure. In truth, I built stellar events from scratch. 50 employees, 3 locations, and the company you're considering for this contract. Her legal counsel set his pen down. Another executive whispered, "Unbelievable." Victoria studied me for a long moment, then suddenly burst into laughter, not mocking, but incredulous. "Oh my God, she spent the entire night slandering her own daughter, while I was waiting to sign a contract with you." That quote cracked the tension like glass. Everyone in the room exhaled, some shaking their heads, some smiling in disbelief. And then the next twist landed. Another assistant rushed in, projecting a headline on the big screen. "From invisible to invaluable, how Lily Sullivan built a catering empire. Without a dollar of family money." It was the Forbes cover one day early. My photo, professional and confident, stared back at me. My parents had wanted me hidden in the kitchen. Now I was staring at the world from a magazine rack. Victoria turned to me, her eyes gleaming. "This goes live tonight?" "Midnight," I confirmed. "So your mother will learn the truth with the rest of the country." I nodded. "Yes." She stepped out to make a phone call. Through the glass wall, I could see her gesturing animatedly, her mouth forming the words, "Margaret Sullivan." Minutes later she returned, a strange smile tugging at her lips. "I just spoke to your mother," she announced. The room fell silent again. "I told her last night's dinner was the most unprofessional event I've ever attended. She begged me not to pull our business. Then I told her I had just signed a $2 million contract with her daughter." She paused, savoring the silence. The sound she made, like all the air had been sucked out of her lungs. My phone buzzed violently on the table. 47 missed calls in 3 minutes, all from Mom. Victoria extended her hand across the table. "Ms. Sullivan, let's sign this contract." The room erupted in applause as I put pen to paper. For the first time in 15 years, I was not the maid, the scapegoat, or the invisible child. I was the CEO. Later, as champagne glasses clinked and congratulations filled the air, my phone lit up again, this time with a text from my father. "Your mother just fainted. What the hell is stellar events?" I slipped the phone back into my bag. That wasn't my emergency anymore. Because in that boardroom, I had discovered the truth. Respect isn't given by blood. It's earned by boundaries. The ink on the contract was barely dry when my phone started buzzing again. 47 missed calls, 12 voicemails, and a string of frantic texts from Sarah. I didn't answer. Instead, I raised my glass as Victoria toasted, "To boundaries." That night, while my family's reputation collapsed in Connecticut, I was celebrating in Florida with industry leaders who saw my worth. The contrast couldn't have been sharper. 2 days later, the Forbes issue hit stands. My face on the cover, headline blazing, "From Invisible to Invaluable." Within hours, the article went viral. My inbox exploded with interview requests, speaking invitations, and new clients. Meanwhile, back in Connecticut, the dominoes were falling fast. Sarah's firm lost its biggest contract. Pinnacle pulled their PR deal the moment Victoria shared her side of the story. $500,000 vanished overnight. My mother, once the queen of country club galas, was quietly removed from 2 charity boards. Officially, it was restructuring. Everyone knew the truth. No one wanted to be associated with Margaret Sullivan, the woman who had bragged about her perfect family while serving pizza on Waterford Crystal. Even my father couldn't escape. His golf buddies, who once envied his successful daughters, now mocked him with one cutting line. "How do you not know your own kid is on the cover of Forbes?" The moment that sealed their downfall came in a text from Sarah late that week. "Mom is calling everyone, trying to explain, but they all saw Victoria's LinkedIn post. They know you're the CEO. They're laughing at us." That quote hit me like both justice and sadness. For years I had been their private shame. Now publicly they were forced to face the truth. As for me, stellar events exploded overnight. 3 new luxury resorts signed on within a week, contracts worth $10 million combined. I promoted Maria to executive chef, James to COO, and hired 20 new employees. At our expansion meeting, Maria smiled at me and said, "You built this company for people like us, overlooked, underestimated. Now the world can't ignore us anymore." Her words echoed inside me. She was right. My company wasn't just a business, it was a home for people who had once been invisible, just like me. One evening, as I stood in my Manhattan condo overlooking Central Park, the same condo my family had never once visited, I scrolled through the flood of messages, congratulations from old clients, requests from new ones, and buried in between, a final voicemail from my father. His voice was quieter than I remembered. "Lily, I'm ashamed. I let your mother's version of you become the truth, but you proved us all wrong. We hurt you and now we're paying the price." I didn't reply. Not yet, because for the first time in my life, I wasn't living for their approval. I was living for mine. Weeks later, my life had settled into a rhythm I barely recognized. Stellar events had doubled in size, my calendar was booked with opportunities I used to only dream about, and my name was no longer hidden in the shadows of someone else's narrative. But the biggest change wasn't the magazine covers or the contracts. It was the peace I felt every morning when I looked in the mirror and saw someone I finally recognized. Me. One evening I agreed to meet my family at a quiet restaurant in Manhattan. They looked smaller than I remembered. My mother's voice, usually sharp, was soft when she whispered, "Lily, we're sorry. We didn't see you." I listened, but I didn't rush to comfort her. Instead, I slid a single sheet of paper across the table. Equal respect or no contact, no more servant treatment, public acknowledgement of who I am. Those are my terms. For the first time in 15 years, they didn't argue. My father nodded. Sarah admitted, "Mom made me feel special by making you feel small." I see it now. That moment wasn't revenge. It was accountability. Here's the truth I want you to remember. Your value doesn't disappear just because someone else refuses to see it. Families can be blind, friends can be cruel, but worth isn't granted by anyone's approval. It already lives inside you. The night I walked out of my parents' house, I thought I was losing everything. In reality, I was gaining the one thing I'd never had: freedom. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family or treated like less than you deserve, let my story remind you. Setting boundaries isn't selfish, it's survival. And sometimes the most powerful word you can say is a simple, steady no. Thank you for listening to my story. If it touched you, consider subscribing. It helps us share more stories of justice and self-worth. And please, drop a comment below. Have you ever had to choose yourself over family expectations? Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear tonight, because in the end, respect is non-negotiable.